Tonight, when you close your eyes, a thought might creep in. A quiet one, not loud enough to scream, but impossible to ignore. You are going to die. Not today, not tomorrow. But one day, absolutely, certainly, you will stop existing. And here is the strange thing. You are the only creature on Earth who knows that. But when did that start? When did the first human mind look at a body going cold in the dirt and think, that is going to happen to me? That moment, wherever it was, whenever it happened, changed everything. It may be the single most consequential thought in the history of your species. Go back 300,000 years. Your ancestors are moving across a landscape that barely resembles the world you know. Open grassland, dense forest, the smell of wood smoke and blood and wet earth. They are smart, remarkably smart. They make tools with a precision that suggests planning, intention, foresight. But there is a difference between knowing how to shape a stone and knowing that your own existence has a shape, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. For a long time, researchers assumed that death awareness arrived late in human history, that it was a luxury of civilization, something that emerged once you had enough food, enough safety, enough quiet to sit and think terrible thoughts. But the evidence no longer supports that. The burial record tells a different story. At a site called Atapuerca in northern Spain, researchers found the bones of at least 28 ancient humans, all deposited together in a pit roughly 430,000 years ago. There were no signs of predators, no signs of habitation, just bodies, carefully placed in a location that served no practical purpose. The people who carried those bodies to that pit did not eat them. They did not abandon them. They did something with intention. Paleoanthropologist Juan Luis Arzuaga, who has studied this site for decades, has argued that this deliberate placement suggests an early symbolic understanding of death, a recognition that the dead body meant something beyond just weight and decay. That is extraordinary, because to treat the dead with meaning, you first have to understand what death is. And to understand what death is, you have to be able to imagine your own. Think about what that requires. It is not enough to observe death. Every animal observes death. A crow will watch another crow get killed. A chimpanzee will carry a dead infant for days, confused by its stillness. But observation is not the same as abstraction. To realize that you are going to die, your brain has to perform a specific and terrifying mental operation. It has to project itself forward in time into a scenario where it no longer exists. That is not instinct. That is imagination turned against itself. Psychologist Jeff Greenberg and his colleagues proposed something called terror management theory in the late 1980s. The theory begins with a simple claim. The awareness of mortality is so destabilizing to the human mind that your entire culture, your art, your religion, your ambition, your self-esteem can be understood as an elaborate psychological buffer against it. Every time you achieve something, you are, on some level, trying to outlast your own death. Every time you belong to a group, you are borrowing the group's permanence. Every time you build something meant to last, you are making a small argument against the void. Greenberg and his colleagues tested this in dozens of experiments. In one famous series, they asked judges to set bail for a woman charged with prostitution. Before reading the case, half the judges were asked to briefly think about their own mortality. The other half were not. The judges who had contemplated their deaths set bail nearly 4 times higher. Their values, their judgments, their sense of right and wrong, all of it intensified when death was on their mind. Your awareness of mortality does not just sit quietly in the background. It shapes the choices you make right now, today, without you noticing. But go back further. Back before bail hearings and courtrooms and cities. Back to a human crouching at the edge of a fire on a cold night, watching an elder die for the first time. What happens in that mind? What is the sequence? First, there is recognition. Something that was alive is now not alive. That moment, the before and the after, becomes a category in the brain, a thing that can happen. Then, and this is the crucial step, there is generalization. If it can happen to them, it can happen to me. Your brain, built for pattern recognition, cannot help but complete the logic. Anthropologist Ernest Becker wrote in his 1973 Pulitzer Prize-winning book that the realization of mortality is the worm at the core of human experience, not a side note. The engine. He argued that everything humans have ever built, every temple, every empire, every theory, every painting on a cave wall, is in some way a response to that original terror. The cave art at Lascaux is roughly 17,000 years old. Animals rendered with extraordinary care in places that required effort and courage to reach. It is hard to look at those images and not see something human behind them, something that wanted to be remembered, something that knew it would not last. And here is where it gets strange. Here is the counterintuitive thing that researchers keep circling back to. The awareness of death may not have broken your ancestors, it may have built them. Psychologist Sheldon Solomon, one of the architects of terror management theory, has argued that the awareness of mortality is not a flaw in human cognition. It is a feature. It creates meaning where meaning would not otherwise exist. It makes relationships feel precious. It makes time feel finite, which makes it feel valuable. A creature that does not know it will die has no reason to build anything lasting, no reason to love with urgency, no reason to ask what any of this is for. The first human who truly realized they were going to die did not lie down and stop moving. Something else happened. They stood up and started doing things that could not be explained by hunger or fear alone. They began to bury the dead with flowers, as evidenced at Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, where pollen deposits suggest deliberate burial rituals as far back as 60,000 years ago. They began to mark time, to tell stories, to invent gods, to ask questions that had no survival value whatsoever. Questions like, why are we here and where do we go? You are the inheritor of that first terrible thought. Every piece of music you have ever loved, every story that ever made you cry, every monument ever built to outlast the people who built it, all of it traces back to that moment by a fire when one mind looked at death and understood that it was not watching a stranger. It was watching a preview. You still live with that knowledge every single day. Most of the time, it sits below the surface. You go about your routines, your plans, your grocery lists and ambitions, and the thought stays quiet. But sometimes, usually at night, it surfaces. And in that moment, you are exactly where your ancestors were, looking at the dark, knowing the first human who realized they were going to die did not have language to describe what they felt. But you do. And you are feeling it right now.